Welcome, everyone. Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing with our mini-series called Mysteries of Creation. Last time, and this time also, we're going to be concentrating on structure and numbers in the Torah account of creation. We saw how hidden within the text are a whole series of numbers, gematriot, and the structure of the verses that reveal enormous gifts about the mysteries of creation. So we'll start with a verse from Isaiah, Yeshayahu, the 48th chapter, the 13th verse. If anyone wants to look it up, the 48th chapter, the 13th verse. And it says, this is the prophet speaking in God's name. So it says, Af yadi yazda aretz, even my hand established the earth. B'yamini mitifcha shemayim, and my right hand spread out the heavens. Korei ani alehem, I call out to them. Ya'amdu yachtav, they stood together. So I'll say that again. My hand has laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand has spanned the heavens, spread out the heavens. When I call to them, they stand up together. So, as we've been doing, many of these teachings are coming from Rav Ginsburg, and specifically from this book, which I've showed everyone, called 913. Shlomo is holding up his copy, The Secret Wisdom of Genesis. Again, 913, the significance is that's the numerical value of the first word, Bereshit, in the beginning. So Rav Ginsburg points out that when you look at the first verse, so we spent a considerable time last week discussing that the first sentence of the Torah, the first verse, has 7 words and 28 letters. 28 is gematria koach, power, strength. And we brought the Rashi, who explains that the reason that that the Torah begins with the account of creation. Rashi brings a verse, koach ma'asav higid lamo letet lehem nachalat goyim. That the power of his deeds, power again is koach. These are the 28 letters of the first verse. Koach ma'asav higid lamo, the power of his deeds, he told his people, letet lehem nachalat goyim, to give them an inheritance among the nations or from the nations. So here, we spent a considerable amount of time understanding that Rashi and the significance of his using this verse that begins with koach as hinting to the 28 letters of the first verse of the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But here, Rav Ginsburg points out, like virtually every verse in the Torah, not every verse, but virtually every verse has what's called an etnachta. It has, we'll call it a comma or a semicolon, where we know where the break it comes in the verse, because in the Torah itself, there are no vowels, there are no punctuation. So the question is, well, how do you know how to read the verse? So we know it from what are called the ta'amim, the musical notes that determine the most practical understanding is how to read the verse. So in the first verse of the Torah, the etnachta comes after the first three words. Bereshit bara Elokim. Et hashamayim ve'et ha'oretz. So Rav Ginsburg points out that the first verse is actually divided into, the first half has 14 letters, and the second half has 14 letters. So what's the significance of that? Of course, 14 and 14 equals 28 equals koach. So 14 is gematria yad. And that's why we started with this verse from Isaiah. What did Isaiah mean, or God meant, because he was speaking through the prophet? My hand has established the earth, and my right hand has spread out the heavens. So this it's hint of why this metaphor of the hands. Well, that's because the first verse of the Torah is divided yad, yad, hand in hand. And this reminds us of a beautiful Torah from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who spoke volumes about the importance of being in a state of joy. And in prayer, many times in the Breslov community, they clap during prayer. We'll call it at key moments. Everyone on their own. It's not a unison kind of thing, but during the silent Amida, when a person gets to a certain feeling of realization or of strength in their prayer, they would clap. And so Rabbi Nachman says, when you take one hand is 14, and the other hand is 14, and you put them together, that makes strength. So Rabbi Nachman had a big thing about clapping, that this creates strength, and strength creates joy. The strength of a person expressing their feelings through clapping creates a power, and that power helps bring joy. So now we can understand the metaphor that Isaiah is using, that God is creating with his two hands. What's interesting in the verse is that one second, that first earth is mentioned. God says, I established the earth with my hand, and with my right hand I stretch out the heavens. So for those who have been coming to this class, in the first class, we discussed the verse that begins the second recounting of creation, which says, Eila toldot shemayim va'aretz b'hi baram. These are the generations of heaven and earth when they were created. B'yom asod Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. On the day that Hashem Elokim created earth and heaven. And there we pointed out that the beginning of the verse mentions heaven and then earth. And the second part mentions earth and then heaven. And based on this, we have the discussion, call it disagreement between Hillel and Shammai. What was created first, heaven or earth? Because in one verse, you have the order switches, first heaven and then earth and then heaven. But of course, in the first verse of the Torah, it's heaven and earth. Nonetheless, Shammai says heaven was created first, and Hillel says the earth. So it's just interesting. I'm just pointing out here, Yeshayahu, Isaiah mentions earth first, before the heavens. That God established the earth, and then he stretched out the heavens. I'm not sure if that means that Isaiah was agreeing with Hillel, but it's just interesting to point that out. One other comment about this is that in the Ashrei prayer that we say 3 times a day, so in a sense, the cardinal verse of Ashrei is Poteach et yadecha umazbiya l'kol chai ratzon. Open, we're speaking to God, open up your hand and give sustenance to all that live. Another way we could read it is umazbiya l'kol chai kama ratzon. Give sustenance to every creature by giving them strength to have will to fulfill their potential. Poteach et yadecha umazbiya l'kol chai ratzon. That is the sustenance that God gives every creature, a will in which to fulfill their purpose. But here we have the idea of hand. Open up your hand. And so the sages read, don't read it, open up your hand, read it, open up your yud, the letter yud. What does that mean? So yud is the smallest of the letters. Of course, it's the first letter in the 4-letter name of God, but it also represents tzimtzum, contraction, because it's the smallest of the letters. And so we learned that before God could create a world, first he had to, as it were, to mitzamtzem, to contract his infinite being in order to make place for the world. Then afterwards, then God shone a ray of light into the middle of the, call it the vacuum, the empty space that was created, and all worlds, spiritual and physical, came into being. So that's very connected to the opening verse of the Torah being split with 14 letters before the etnachta, before you take a pause. And the second half of the verse is another 14 letters. So in a sense, creation occurs through God opening up his hand. Because if the hand would remain, as it were, in a state of contraction, there's no place for a creation. So we say, Poteach et yadecha, open up your hand, open up your yud, so there can be a creation. So that is our first insight. The next insight is the gematria of bara Elokim, that God created. Not the word Bereshit in the beginning, just bara Elokim equals 289 in gematria. So what is the significance of that? 289 is 17 squared. 17 is the number of Tov, goodness, Chesed, loving kindness, goodness. So Rav Ginsburg says that right from the beginning, we see this idea that God created because he wanted to do good. And we see that in the continuation of the first verse. in the acronym for Et Hashemayim Ve'et Haaretz. Those 4 words, the first 4 letters spell out Aleph and Hey and Vav and Hey. And this is a name of God. Aleph and Hey and Vav and Hey is the name of God. This name does not appear explicitly in the Torah, but it appears in the first verse. And this is called the goodly name. And what is the function of this name? The function of this name is it connects heaven and earth. It connects all spiritual reality with all physical reality. And when we speak about the Baal Shem Tov, so many people interpret what Baal Shem Tov literally means, the master of the good name. And many explain that the good name that the Baal Shem Tov was master of is this name of Aleph and Hey and Vav and Hey. Why? Because it connects heaven and earth. And this explains a lot about who the Baal Shem Tov was and what he was trying to accomplish. The Baal Shem Tov, of course, was totally spiritual, mystical, elevated, but his whole mission was to bring that down to earth. And that's why he had a particular love of what we refer to as the simple Jew, which was by far the majority of Jews. The vast majority of Jews were working people who could barely put food on their table. The situation in Europe was, especially in Russia, Poland, Ukraine, was so difficult for the Jews that the vast majority of people didn't have the ability or the luxury to sit and learn. They had to provide for their families. And the Baal Shem Tov, his whole mission was to connect the great minds of the generation, the yeshiva society, with the simple Jew, and to bring heaven down to earth and raise earth to heaven. And so that's why the Baal Shem Tov, many interpret that is the name that he was master of, because that was his great mission. So here again, this name, Aleph, Hey, Vav, and Hey, equals 17. So when it says, Bara Elokim, God created, and then we have this mystical name of God appearing in the acronym of Et Hashemayim Ve'et Haaretz, and that name equals 17, and Bara Elokim equals 17 squared. All of this is to teach us call it the motivation, or at least our perception of one of the reasons why God created the world was to do good. As we continue tonight, we're going to see a slightly fuller version of why God created the world. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. So what I'm going to ask someone, for those people who checked their WhatsApp today, we posted 2 charts that we're going to use tonight. One for sure, and hopefully we'll get to the other one. But if someone who can access your WhatsApp, and if you could share in the chats now, just in case someone doesn't have the WhatsApp, but everyone is welcome to look into WhatsApp And I'm just going to show you for a second. This is the chart that we're going to be looking at. So hopefully someone can share that in the chart. Okay. Good. Jen just did it. So everyone can look in the chats and you'll see the chart that we're referring to. So since I mentioned that encoded in the first verse of the Torah in two different ways is the idea of goodness. Again, this very hidden name of God, Aleph and Hey and Vav and Hey, Et HaShemayim V'et Ha'aretz, and equals 17 equals good, and Bara Elokim equals 17 squared equals good. And I mentioned that this is one of the reasons that we entertain, at least, because ultimately we don't really know why God created the world. We have certain traditions and we use our minds and our hearts to propose. Perhaps when Mashiach comes, all of these secrets will be fully revealed. So hopefully people are either, a bunch of people just shared it. So either open up your chats or open up your WhatsApp and you will see the chart. Now we're going to start that Rav Ginsburg says there are four major reasons proposed for why God created the world. And he arranges it according to the four letters of God's name. So we're going to start from below, from the final Hey of Hashem's name. And that expression is Ein Melech Below Am. There's no king without a people. So this, of course, relates the lower Hey of God's name. There is no page where I'm getting it from is Sod Hashem Lire'av, Reish Vav. If anyone is looking in Rav Ginsburg's book, Sod Hashem Lire'av, the source for this chart is on page Reish Vav. So this idea, there's no king without a people. So this relates to the lower Hey of God's name, which is Malchut. Malchut is kingship. So there's this idea, like we say 100 times a day, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam. Blessed are you, God, the King of the universe, the sovereign of the universe. So it's pointed out that there is something essential in God's being that relates to kingship, sovereignty. And therefore we recognize this because 100 times a day, we acknowledge God as King of the universe. But this is saying is, if you didn't have anyone acknowledging it, if there was no people acknowledging it, God could not, as it were, manifest this essential attribute of kingship. Then we go to the Vav of Hashem's name, and this is why we're doing this right now, because this is called Teva Hatov Lehetiv. It's the nature of goodness to want to dispense goodness, to share goodness, to do good acts. So we're relating that, again, we're talking about the essential attributes of God. And I keep on saying as it were, because in a certain sense, God has no attributes. Like the Rambam was very, very strong that any attribute that we attach to Hashem, we're using human language and human consciousness to try to explain something which is beyond our true ability to understand. But nonetheless, the idea that God's essence is goodness And therefore, he created a world so there would be someone to give to, someone to share with. Then we go to the upper hay of God's name. This comes from the Zohar. Bagin de ishmaduun le, in order that he should be known. That, again, we're talking in human terms. We have to understand that. But everyone wants to be recognized. It's a human attribute to want to be recognized, whether it's by friends or family or society or community. It's just a natural thing. Obviously, it can get out of hand and lead to great pride and jealousy and disappointment and frustration when one doesn't get acknowledgement. But we're talking about like in a pure positive way, that when there's just this urge, and therefore many times we have to overcome this urge and give for the sake of giving, or creating for the sake of creating without being attached to what people will think about it. I'm just using an example of if someone writes a great poem, writes a great piece of music, paints a great picture, cooks a great meal. There's a certain place where we can do it totally unattached to what anyone thinks about it. This poem or art or music came from the depths of my soul, and that is what it is. On the other hand, everyone likes, like when you give a gift, everyone likes to be told thank you. When we eat, we thank God for the food. Before we eat, we say a bracha, thanking God for the food. So here, there's a place where God wanted to be known because he wanted to share this level of divine consciousness. The Rambam almost goes one step further and identifies the essence of God with intellect. Not everyone agrees with the Rambam, but he tied intellect very, very strongly with the essence of God. So the Zohar says God created the world because he wanted to be known. And then the upper Yud is an expression we've shared many times. And according to Rav Ginsburg, this by far is the most enigmatic and deep and profound explanation of why God created the world. And that is Nitaveh Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyot Lo Dira B'Tachtonim, that God had a passion to have for himself a dwelling place in the lower worlds. And this one, it verges on being beyond our comprehension, our logic of why God, who before creation was infinite, eternal, just light beyond time and space, would have a passion to live and dwell in a very physical, material, and even flawed world. This is a great mystery of creation. Nonetheless, this is from a midrash. This midrash is from 2,000 years ago, Midrash Tanchuma. So it's not like a recent Hasidic idea. It's in Bereshit Rabbah, Midrash Tanchuma, that God had a passion to have a dwelling place in the lower world. And of course, that's one of the secrets of building the Mishkan. building the tabernacle in the desert and then the temple in Jerusalem. This represents creating a dwelling place for God. Ultimately, we're told, God says, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, make for me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. And the commentaries point out, it doesn't say in its midst, meaning in the physical tabernacle or temple, but in their midst, in the soul and the heart and the mind of human beings. Okay, now we'll go back to a couple more numbers. And that is when you take the first verse of the Torah and you translate all of the letters into what's called mispar katan, to reduced letterings, where the higher values of letters are dropped down to their lowest common denominator, where let's say a 10 becomes 1, 200 becomes 2, 400 becomes 4, the lowest common denominator. And so the first verse of the Torah will equal 82. Now, what's interesting, we already learned that there's a structure to every verse. And so in the first verse of the Torah, there's a dividing between the first 3 words and the next 4 words. So here, the first 3 words equal 32, and the second equal 50. 50 and 32, of course, equal 82. So these 2 numbers should ring a bell for everyone immediately. 32 relates to what are called the 32 pathways of wisdom, Lamed Beit Netivot Chachma, and the 50 relate to Chamishim Sharei Bina, the 50 gates of understanding. So this is an amazing thing that in the first verse of the Torah is hinted these 2 major concepts. And Kabbalistically, when you get into the depths of understanding creation, that's where you get the unity of Chachma and Bina. And we're told that Chachma and Bina are like 2 beloveds that never separate. So here you have in the first verse of the Torah hinted to the 32 pathways of wisdom and the 50 gates of understanding. The Sefer Yetzirah begins with the 32 pathways of wisdom. Those are literally the first words, B'lamed bet netivot chachma. With 32 pathways of wisdom, God created, and actually there are many different names and attributes of God, created the world. And we learned that these 32 pathways of wisdom are the 10 sfirot and the 22 letters. 22 and 10, of course, equals 32. These are the pathways of wisdom, the letters and the sfirot. These are the building blocks of creation. So here we have in Bereshit bara Elokim is hinted, well, how did God do it? Through the 10 sfirot, which are translated as the 10 expressions through which God created the world, and the 22 Hebrew letters. So this is an amazing thing. That's very good. Joshua just pointed out in the chat that 82 is the inverse of 28. That was very, very good. 28, again, are the 28 letters, and 82, for those who followed the series of 70 faces, we had a whole chapter of inverse numbers, the importance of inverse numbers or words or letters that are inversed. So that's just an amazing, amazing idea. I want to go back for a second. Because last week, actually 2 weeks ago, when we started the series, we spent a good part of the time understanding Avraham's role in creation. Because remember, we had the verse, Ela toldot shemaim ba'aretz behi baram. These are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation. And we learned that sages in the Talmud say, don't read it behi baram, in their creation, read it be'avraham, because they're the exact same letters. Behi baram is Avraham. And there, I'm not going to go back into it now, but we learned a whole series of ideas that Avram is the merkava of chesed, of goodness. And when it says that the generations of heaven and earth, they're created through Avram. Avram is an archetypal figure. He is the chariot of this creative energy. And if you remember, there's 2 verses. Olam chesed yibaneh. God will create the world through chesed. Well, chesed is Avraham. So I'm mentioning all of this because I'm going back to this very hidden name of Aleph, Hey, and Vav, and Hey. And we said that came as a acronym for Eta Shemayim Ve'eta Aretz. But this same acronym appears in a different place. And that was in last week's Parsha, where it says, V'yisa Avram haloch v'nesoa hanegba. And Avram lifted himself up and he journeyed and he traveled towards the south. So we learned, first of all, what does it mean he traveled towards the south? Well, in that pasuk, there's a reality to that. He was going from the north of Israel to the south. But Rav Ginsburg points out that south here is always associated with chesed, because the directions relate to the lower sfirot. And so the right hand, which is Avraham, which is chesed, always relates to the south. So Rav Ginsburg explains when it says that he journeyed all the time to the south, means Avram was in a constant journey of going towards chesed. He was always revealing chesed. So if you take the first letters of Avram, haloch, v'nesoa, hanegba, you get the same 4-letter name of God. Aleph and Hey and Vav and Hey. Aleph is Avram, Hey is haloch, the Vav is v'nesoa, and the Hey is hanegba. So I wanted to mention this because this ties Avram once again with the creation of the world. And that's why we say that when God wanted to create the world, Yisrael Allah b'machshava techila, the thought of Israel arose first, but in a deeper way, it's the thought of Avraham arose first. As we just learned, that God's nature is chesed, and Avram is the merkava of chesed. And one of the main reasons that God created the world was to bestow chesed. And that was Avram's great trait of hosting guests. As it says in this week's Parsha, when the 3 angels come, well, he didn't know they were angels at first. He thought they were 3 pagans. And yet he interrupted an incredible revelation of God in order to take care of these 3 strangers. So this is the energy with which God created the world. Okay, I want to now go to another number. And this is very, very connected, as we'll see in a minute, to this year. This year in Hebrew is referred to as Tav Shin Pei Gimel, which adds up to 783, because we're in the year 5,783. So usually we don't mention the millennium, the 5,000. So we refer to this year as Tav Shin Pei Gimel, which equals 783. So this is a Torah that Rav Ginsburg has been giving over all year. And that is that in the account of creation and the account of the creation of human beings, the word echad appears 3 times. In the first day of creation, the day ends, Vayhi erev vayhi voker, yom echad. It was evening and it was day, one day. And the commentaries point out, Rashi also, it doesn't say the first day, which we would expect because the other ones are the second day, the third day, the fourth day. So why doesn't it say the first day? Instead, it says one day. So there was this idea of unity. Rashi points out that the angels had not been created yet. There was still, in a sense, only God. And the creation of heaven and earth, all of that was on such a high spiritual level, it was still all part of God's unity. In fact, everything is part of God's unity. But there was something about the first day, as we learned last week, is the Rashi in a different place points out that everything that would ever be created was created on the first day. And that's the unity that we see in the universe. And that is the understanding of the Big Bang, that everything, all physical creation, all the universe, big science is only dealing with the physical material universe. Unfortunately, and there's not a recognition of the spiritual universes. But all of the tens of billions of galaxies all came from the infinite dot of the Big Bang. So that's the one day. Then in the second day of creation, God gathered the waters to one place, makom echad, because the earth, as it were, was covered with water, and God, in a sense, gathered the waters to what we call oceans and seas and lakes and rivers, and exposed the dry land. Excuse me, that's on the third day. On the third day. And then, so that's the second time that the word one is used in creation. And the third time is when, after God separates the male and female component of Adam, who is born, we'll call it androgynous, and God separates them into male and female. And then it says that a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they will become basar echad. They'll become one flesh. So something we've discussed many times is that the Sefer Yetzirah, which is considered perhaps the first book of Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah, much of it is based on this idea called Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. Olam means world, which means space. Shana means year, which means time. And nefesh means soul or consciousness. And much of the Sefer Yetzirah is based on this foundational idea. So here you see the three appearances of one fit into that perfectly. The first appearance is Yom Echad. That's time. The second one is the gathering of the waters to one place. That's space. And the last one is that husband and wife, male and female, will become one flesh. Basar Echad. That is soul or consciousness. So that's just a beautiful understanding. So, but why am I bringing all of this? Other than the fact that this is one of the mysteries of creation, is Rav Ginsburg explains that if you take those three phrases, Yom Echad, Makom Echad, Basar Echad, and you add up their values, it equals 783, which is the number of this year. So he's explaining that there's something essential, intrinsic about this year that if we would plug into it, is about unity, is about oneness. And it's significant because this year is what's called a Hakhel year. What is Hakhel? In the book of Devarim, near the end of the book of Devarim, a mitzvah, it's one of the 613 mitzvot, is in the year following Shemitah, which is this year. This past year was a Shemitah year in Israel. During Sukkot, everyone would come to the temple and the king would read from the book of Devarim. And this ritual was called Hakhel, from the word to gather together. So it used to be that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, every year that was a Hakhel year, he would say that's like the theme of the year, that's the energy of the year. And he would encourage and promote people gathering together to learn and what's called verbringen. Verbringen is to I'll use the vernacular, like to party together, to celebrate together, to sing together, to drink l'chaim together, to speak Torah together. What's called hitva'adut, a verbringen. And so this year is a Hakhel year. So it's significant that Rav Ginsburg is saying that there is something essential about oneness this year, because Hakhel is bringing everyone together. And it says men, women, children, even babies. Everyone was encouraged to come. And they asked, why bring the babies? And so they answered, to give merit to the parents who bring them. But what does that mean on a deeper level? On a deeper level, I'm sure you've seen in shul where many times parents bring young children. And let's say when the Torah is taken out of the ark and is being carried around and everyone kisses it. So you'll see parents, encouraging their children to kiss the Torah. So you might ask, well, are they ever even going to remember this? But we shouldn't minimize the power that some of these impressions leave on the soul. And so even little babies were brought to Hakhel. Nowadays, they're doing incredible amount of research about the effect of what is happening outside of a mother and how it affects the fetus in her womb. This is like a new area of research, But now they know, like, certain foods, drink, medicine, drugs can have like an incredibly positive or negative effect on a fetus. But now they're even finding that when music is being played, they can actually pick up that the fetus is experiencing it on some level. That's why we have this idea that there's an angel in the womb that is teaching the baby the entire Torah. And then when the baby is born, as it's being born, the angel touches it here. That's why they say we have a cleft in our lip, and forgets the whole thing. So everyone asks, well, if that's, why did an angel just spend all that time teaching the fetus the whole Torah only to make it forget it? And so they answer that only in the conscious mind does the baby forget. In the unconscious, it's still there. And that's why many Baal Tshuvas, many people who are not brought up religious, or people who are not even brought up Jewish, they will have some kind of exposure or experience of something Jewish. And the feeling is, this is familiar to me. This makes sense to me because it's coming from the unconscious. That's what's called the Rishimu. That's the impression that's left from what the angel has taught us. And so many times, even a non-Jew will have experiences that will lead them ultimately to convert, because something is sparked that it's like a reincarnated memory of something that's planted so deep in the unconscious, but in this lifetime it didn't come out yet, and then all of a sudden it comes out. But this happens to a lot of Baalei Tshuva, very much. Okay, so now I'm going to end with one more idea. And the second chart that we shared in the chats here and in the WhatsApp, we'll get to next time, because it's such an incredible teaching. There's no way I could rush through it at this point. So I'm going to end with another idea, which is a very, very cardinal idea. It's a known idea, but I put a name to it, which is one becomes two in order to become one. What does that mean? One becomes two in order to become one. So we know that the Torah begins with a big bet, And bet, of course, equals two. What does this bet represent? It represents that before creation, there was only the oneness of God. And creation demarks there's now something, as it were, other than God. Ultimately, though, the purpose of consciousness is to understand that even though we live in a world of opposites, a dualistic world, a bipolar world, everything is opposites. Everywhere you turn, and the verse even says, "Zeh le'umat zeh asa Elokim." This opposite this did God create. Everything has an action and an equal action. So this is the formula. The oneness of God we'll just say for the 4 reasons that we entertained, for possibilities of why God created the world. But when God created the world, he created in a way that it would have at least the illusion of being separate. So 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. And that becomes the spiritual task, is to see through the illusion of duality, of a bipolar world, and to see Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God, our God, God is 1. So that is 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. Now let's take the same formula and look at human beings. God created Adam, male and female. He created them. But again, according to tradition, male and female were 1. And then God separated them. 1 becomes 2 in order that they should become, like we said in our previous insight, Basar Echad, 1 flesh. 1 becomes 2. Adam becomes Adam and Chava, male and female, in order that they should cling to each other and become 1 flesh. So 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. There's another manifestation of this, and that is in the history of the Jewish people. We had the 12 tribes were 1 nation. At a certain point, there was a split between what's called the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Israel split into 2. And it lasted for a couple hundred years. And then Assyria came and took the 10 tribes away, the lost tribes. And in a sense, we haven't become 1 again. And that's why the prophet Ezekiel, God came to Ezekiel and said, take 2 branches. And 1 is Yehuda and 1 is Ephraim. Ephraim represents the northern kingdom and Yehuda represents the southern kingdom. And he said, put them together and they will become 1 again. So this also is a great mystery, why that whole historical dynamic had to happen. But in Israel today, in a sense, we see it, and that is, it's the subject of so much talk, is there's a tendency to talk about Israel as if it's a bipolar nation. We have secular and religious. You have Ashkenazim and you have Sephardim. You have right wing and you have left wing. And there's a reality to all of that. But we know that the purpose is for us to come together. And that, of course, just the fact that Israel exists and has survived means that there is a certain oneness, despite the apparent disagreements or separations. So again, here we have 1 became 2 in order for us to come back together again. And that process of becoming 1 again, that's what gives us strength. Because we are coming, Israel has Jews now from approximately 120 nations, all came together in this little tiny piece of land in order to build a new country that would be a light unto the nations. So we will conclude there. that we should merit to see one becomes two in order to become one. In other words, so much of the world is separated, one from the other, one country from another country, one culture from another country, one religion from another religion, one race from another race. But ultimately, the Messianic era, the Messianic message will be that ultimately we are meant to live in this world in peace and harmony. May we all see it soon and in our day.